So the matchup between Ireland and the Springboks has just come to a close. As you can see, 13 points to 8. A last-minute thriller between the two sides in which the Irish were able to get themselves the victory. There is a lot to talk about in this game. We're going to try and keep it relatively brief in this review, but we will be looking through at the stats, some of the players who stepped up in this contest, and also where from here for both of these sides. But starting off, the game started at a frantic pace. Both of these sides wanted to go out there, put on a show early. Ireland opting not to go for the three-pointers in the first 20 or so minutes, instead kicking for the corner. But little did they know that line-out was not quite going to be firing the way it normally would. Ronan Kelleher, I believe he had about 5 line-outs that were stolen by the Springboks, which definitely hurt the Irish early, seeing as they did have Dan Sheehan coming off the bench rather than starting him. But Kelleher, to his credit, they fought through it, and they managed to get that line out working the way that they liked. They scored the first try of the match. Ireland was the try of Mackenzie Hansen. And going into halftime, 7 points to 3. It always looked like it was going to be an extremely close game in the second half. The Springboks, similar to what they did in their game up against Scotland, they came out firing. They looked intense. They looked very strong with the ball in hand. And in the end, it was a wide cutout pass from Marnie Libbok straight to Chethlin Colby, and that got the South Africans back into the contest. The problem for South Africa in this game, though, I will have to mention it, the kicking tee. It's been the question mark of their whole 2023 without Pollard, whether or not Libbok is the right option, whether they should be going with Balimza, whether they should be going with Faf de Klerk. In this case, Faf de Klerk, he missed 2 from 2. Marnie Libbok, I believe he only got the 1 kick over, missing about 2 or 3 alongside that. And when you add up those points, the scoreboard looks a little bit different. For the Irish, though, they will still feel like they had a couple chances that they weren't quite able to make the most of, so there is plenty of improvement to be made for these two sides, but by far the most intense feel to a game that we have had in this Rugby World Cup, and that's saying something, seeing as we've just seen Portugal draw with Georgia, but this game, it just had that little bit of an extra edge, seemed like it could have gone either way throughout the whole game, but Ireland in the end get themselves that 5 points, although in the overall standings, they will receive 4 points on the table. They have secured themselves a spot in the Rugby World Cup quarterfinals. South Africa at the moment, they are sitting in second. They should still go through, but the only side that could possibly catch them would be the Scottish at this stage. Or Tonga. If they can win a few of their games back-to-back, they'd have the chance, but more than likely, it is going to be South Africa and Ireland making their way through. The next time that these two sides can meet is in the final of the Rugby World Cup, and I think after this game, a lot of people want to see these two sides run it back to see whether or not the result is different or whether it is relatively similar. Looking through at some of the stats for this game, we saw 13 tackles made by Caelan Doris, so he was the leading tackler throughout this matchup. For the Irish, the most running meters came for Damien Balimza with 73, and the most carries over the gain line came for Jesse Kriel. In terms of the stats, South Africa throughout the first 35 minutes or so were sitting around that 60% possession as well as territory, whereas by the time we got to half-time, that had actually gone back in favour of the Irish. So the territory for the whole game, 54% for the Irish. Possession after the 80 minutes, 50-50. There were times in this game it seemed like we couldn't split the teams. That stat kind of says about the same thing. The running meters, we saw more from the South Africans, 372 compared to the 226 of the Irish. 23 defenders beaten by the Springboks, 19 by Ireland, more offloading from the Springboks throughout their play as well. And that line out, like I mentioned, it was where it was a lot more shaky for the Irish, actually having 6 unsuccessful lineouts of the 18 in total, which is actually a reasonably high number for a game of rugby. That is also not including the 7 of 9 that the Springboks had. So the ball was going into touch more often than not, and a lot of the times it was tricky to get it to a teammate. And I think one of the main reasons for that was Franco Mostert. I felt he was a little bit unlucky with how early they took him off the field, definitely because of the impact he had at the line-out, also making a lot of big tackles, helping get him the turnovers and the breakdown as well. I felt like he could have had maybe an extra few minutes on the park. Also alongside him, in terms of the South Africans who stepped up in this game, I felt like Damien Dialendi. He didn't really do anything wrong. He didn't make a huge amount of meters, but he was still able to break over the top of Gary Ringrose, run over the top of Johnny Sexton, and help the Springboks just that little bit to get on the front foot. For the Irish, Nat Hansen, he was the man who did score the try, although I think a lot of credit needs to go to Johnny Sexton throughout this game with the way he was able to be the ringmaster of this backline, finding the passing options. He actually did help set up that Matt Hansen try by running the ball straight rather than passing straight away, and then it opened up the gap. On the outside, Jamison Gibson-Park, another player who I felt did extremely well throughout this contest. And Josh Van den Fleer, he did dislocate his finger within the first about minute of the game, but still managed to get back into it, get a few turnovers in the breakdown, and certainly one to watch throughout the rest of this Rugby World Cup. Now, I will mention it, the penalty count, it was relatively high in this game. 11 against the Springboks, 9 against the Irish. No yellow or red cards in this game, which I think was a bit of a bonus. There were moments in this game, just like all games, that we saw some consistency and some inconsistencies. But I think overall, when these two sides look at this game, Ireland would have felt they could have scored a few more points on the board. South Africa, if they have kicked any of those 4 misses, they could have walked away with the victory here. So I think that definitely helps Pollard's chances of making his way back into the box by the time they get to the quarterfinals. But I mentioned it on the live stream, and I'll mention it again. The Springboks lost the game in 2019, and look how that turned out for them. So it's not all done and dusted yet for the Boks. Ireland, massive winning streak at the moment. They are going to look to keep on propelling themselves right up to the final further than they have ever been before in a Rugby World Cup. And to be honest, if this was the final of the Rugby World Cup, I don't think too many people would be complaining after watching this one. But thank you all very much for tuning into this post-match review. If you did enjoy, sure to leave a like and subscribe. We will be live for the rest of the Rugby World Cup games on the channel doing the commentary. So if you do want to check that out as well, it is greatly appreciated. And I will see you all for the next one.